Tonight, we're not here to fix anything, not to understand everything, not to become someone better before you're allowed to rest. This is a quiet space where we gently let go and return to inner peace through soft Zen stories inspired by the Buddha, shared slowly so your mind can soften and your body can rest. Maybe today asked a little too much from you. Too many thoughts, too many worries, too many small things you tried to hold together. And maybe, just for this moment, you're ready to set them down. Here, you don't need to improve yourself. You don't need to solve tomorrow. You are already enough simply by being here, breathing quietly. Just for a moment. Where are you listening from tonight? Wherever you are, I'm grateful you're here, sharing this quiet space. Let your breath slow as if it remembers the way home. Let your shoulders soften like they no longer need to carry the world. Tonight, we'll listen to a simple story. A story from ordinary life, carrying a small thread of Zen and Buddhist wisdom. Not to give you more to think about, but to help you loosen your grip. Because suffering rarely ends by force. It softens when we stop holding it so tightly. There's nothing to rush, nothing to achieve, only a gentle drifting into rest, into stillness. Whether you stay awake or slowly fall asleep, this moment is already enough. And now, we begin tonight's journey with these Zen stories. The locker room smelled like metal and soap. Noah sat on the bench with his boots unlaced, elbows resting on his knees, helmet placed carefully on the floor in front of him. The room was mostly empty now. A few lockers stood open, their doors swinging slightly before settling back into stillness. Somewhere down the hall, a shower ran water hitting tile in a steady rhythm. Noah rubbed a towel across the back of his neck and let out a slow breath. It hadn't been a bad call. No one was hurt. No fire had spread. Everything had gone the way it was supposed to. And yet his body felt worn in that familiar way, like something inside him had been scraped a little thinner. He picked up his helmet and turned it in his hands. The surface was scuffed, dulled from years of use. A few scratches caught the light. None of them new, none of them dramatic. Just the quiet evidence of repetition. People often talked about his job like it was all adrenaline and heroics. But most days, it wasn't like that. Most days were about patience, about waiting, about being ready for something that might not happen. And when it did happen, about staying steady under pressure. That steadiness came at a cost. Noah slid the helmet back into his locker and closed the door. The metal clanged softly final. He leaned back against the bench and stared at the floor, letting his breathing slow. Lately, he'd been feeling the weight of it more than usual. Not fear, not doubt about his ability, something quieter. The sense that each challenge left a mark even when things went well. That each test, each difficult moment was sanding something down inside him. He He wondered sometimes if all this friction was slowly wearing him away. An older firefighter had once said something to him during a long night shift years ago. They'd been sitting on the back step of the station drinking burnt coffee, watching the sky lighten just enough to signal morning. "You know what they do with jade?" the man had said out of nowhere. "They don't cut it clean. They grind it. Over and over. Takes forever." Noah hadn't known what to say at the time. He'd nodded, half listening, half exhausted. Now the memory surfaced again, unexpectedly clear. Jade didn't start out smooth. It wasn't impressive at first glance. It was dense, rough, hard to shape. And the only way it became something people valued was through repeated polishing, through friction. Not all at once, not dramatically, just steadily over time. Noah flexed his hands, noticing the faint soreness in his fingers. These hands had learned how to hold steady when things shook, how to grip, release, adjust. They bore small scars he rarely thought about anymore. He'd always assumed that being tested meant something was wrong. That struggle was a sign of weakness. That if things were truly aligned, they would feel easier. But the jade didn't become dull because it was polished. It became clear. Noah stood and stretched his arms overhead, feeling the tightness along his shoulders release a little. The room seemed quieter now, the earlier energy fully drained away. He thought about the moments that had shaped him the most. They weren't the ones where everything went perfectly. They were the moments that had demanded something from him. Patience, restraint, courage, humility. Moments that had forced him to slow down and stay present. Each one had felt uncomfortable at the time. Each one had left him changed. He picked up his jacket and slipped it on the familiar weight settling around him. It felt grounding, like a reminder of who he was when things got hard. The locker room lights flickered briefly, then steadied. Noah turned toward the door, pausing for a second before leaving. Maybe he wasn't being worn down. Maybe he was being refined. The thought didn't erase the fatigue. It didn't make the work lighter, but it gave the weight a different shape, one he could carry without resentment. Noah reached for the door handle and stepped out into the quiet hallway. The night beyond waited calmly, indifferent to what he'd just been through. And for the first time that evening, he felt less like something was being taken from him, and more like something was being revealed. The hallway outside the locker room felt cooler, quieter. Noah's footsteps echoed softly as he walked toward the exit, the sound fading almost as soon as it appeared. The building had settled for the night. Whatever urgency had filled it earlier was gone now, replaced by a steady calm that didn't need explanation. He pushed the door open and stepped outside. The air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of asphalt and damp grass. A few stars were visible above the station, dim but present. Noah paused, hands in his jacket pockets, and let the night meet him where he was. His body still felt tired. That hadn't changed, but the tiredness no longer felt like something he needed to fight. It felt earned, honest, like a signal that he had stayed present when it mattered. He thought again about the jade, about how polishing wasn't about force. It was about consistency. Pressure applied slowly, carefully, with attention. Too much and the stone cracked. Too little and nothing changed. The process demanded patience more than strength. That felt familiar. Noah had learned over the years how to stay with difficult moments without rushing past them. How to respond instead of react. How to trust his training when instinct wanted to take over. None of that showed up as brilliance from the outside. It showed up as quiet reliability. And that reliability had been shaped, not gifted. He walked toward his car and unlocked it, the sound of the door opening small and final in the quiet lot. Before getting in, he leaned against the side of the vehicle, feeling the cool metal through his jacket. He remembered times when he'd wished things were easier. When he'd wondered why certain challenges kept returning slightly different, but familiar enough to recognize. He'd thought he was failing to move past something. Now the pattern looked different. The repetition wasn't punishment. It was practice. Each time he stayed steady, something inside him smoothed out just a little more. Each time he chose patience over force, clarity over impulse. He became more himself, not less. Noah sat in the driver's seat and closed the door. The interior light clicked on briefly, then went dark. He rested his hands on the steering wheel and took a slow breath in, then out. The mind liked to tell stories about struggle, that it meant damage, that it meant loss. But the body often knew better. The body understood adaptation. It understood how friction could strengthen instead of weaken. He started the car and let it idle, not in a hurry to leave. The engine's low vibration traveled up through the seat, grounding him. Noah didn't feel proud. He didn't feel accomplished. What he felt was something quieter and more stable, a sense of trust. Trust that what he was going through was shaping him in ways he couldn't fully see yet. The jade didn't shine while it was being polished. It didn't announce its progress. It simply endured the process slowly, becoming clear. Noah pulled out of the lot and onto the road. The station disappeared behind him, lights dimming in the rearview mirror. The route home was familiar. He didn't need directions. As he drove, the tension in his shoulders eased. His thoughts loosened their grip. The day began to recede, leaving behind only what was necessary. He wasn't broken. He wasn't behind. He was becoming. The road stretched ahead, dark and open. Noah followed it, calmly illuminated, just enough to keep moving. Whatever came next would bring its own friction. He knew that, but now it felt less like something to fear and more like part of the shaping. The jade would continue to be polished, and in its own time, it would shine. The phone was still in her hand when Priya realized she hadn't heard her own thoughts in hours. The room was dim lit only by a small lamp on the nightstand. Outside traffic passed in slow waves, the sound softened by distance and glass. Priya lay on her bed with one leg bent, the other stretched out, scrolling without really seeing anything. Opinions, updates, advice, noise. Her thumb moved automatically, trained by habit more than interest. Every post seemed to carry a suggestion, what to care about, what to fix, what to become. None of it was meant specifically for her, but all of it felt oddly personal. She sighed and locked the screen, placing the phone face down beside her. The sudden quiet felt unfamiliar, like stepping into a room after music stops. Priya stared at the ceiling. She'd always been good at listening. At work, she absorbed feedback easily, adjusted quickly, stayed aware of expectations. Among friends, she picked up on moods, unspoken tensions, shifts in tone. She had learned early that paying attention kept things smooth. But somewhere along the way, listening had turned outward almost entirely. Lately, she'd felt unsure in small ways. Not lost, just disconnected. Decisions that used to feel simple now came with hesitation. She found herself asking for reassurance more often, checking reactions before trusting her own instincts. It wasn't that she didn't have an inner voice. It was that it had become very quiet. Priya rolled onto her side and pulled the blanket up around her shoulders. The fabric brushed softly against her skin. She adjusted the pillow until it felt just right, then stilled. In the absence of the phone's glow, the room felt larger, slower. Her breathing, which she hadn't noticed before, became more obvious, steady, a little shallow, then deeper. She remembered something her mother used to say when Priya was younger, usually when she was overwhelmed or unsure. If you can't hear yourself, she'd say, it doesn't mean you're lost. It just means the room is loud. At the time, Priya hadn't thought much of it. Now, lying here with the world temporarily muted, the words surfaced gently. She closed her eyes. At first, there was nothing, just static, leftover thoughts from the day. Half-finished conversations, to-do lists that hadn't gotten the message that the day was over. She didn't push them away. She let them pass. Slowly, the noise thinned. Priya noticed the smallest sensations, the weight of the blanket, the warmth of the mattress, the way her jaw loosened when she wasn't paying attention to it. These weren't messages or insights, just signals that she was here. And then beneath all that, something softer. Not words, not instructions, a sense. It was easy to miss, like a whisper that didn't insist on being heard. It didn't argue. It didn't explain itself. It simply felt true, familiar, almost shy. Priya didn't try to name it. She stayed still, afraid that effort might make it disappear. She realized how different this felt from the noise she usually responded to. The loud opinions came with urgency, with pressure, with certainty about what should be done next. This quiet voice didn't rush. It didn't compete. It waited. Priya breathed in slowly, then out. The quiet didn't go away. It stayed right where it was, not asking to be followed, just asking to be noticed. She thought about how often she'd mistaken volume for wisdom, how often she'd trusted what spoke the loudest, the fastest, the most confidently, and how that had slowly taught her to doubt what arrived gently. The quiet voice wasn't fragile. It was patient. It had been there the whole time. Priya turned slightly onto her back, one hand resting on her stomach. Her breathing deepened again naturally, as if her body recognized the moment before her mind did. She didn't need to decide anything tonight. She didn't need to act on what she felt. She just needed to remember that it existed. The lamp cast a soft circle of light on the wall. The rest of the room stayed in shadow. The outside world continued, but it felt farther away now. Priya let herself stay in that space where nothing demanded her attention, where no one else's voice crowded the room. The quiet voice didn't say much, but it was enough to know it was there. Priya stayed where she was, letting the stillness settle around her. The room felt different now. Not emptier, just calmer. Like a lake after the wind passes when the surface smooths out on its own. The sounds from outside hadn't disappeared completely, but they no longer pulled at her attention. They moved in the background, unimportant. Her breathing slowed without effort. Each inhale felt softer, each exhale a little longer, as if her body was finally being allowed to finish a sentence it had been holding. The quiet voice didn't grow louder. It didn't need to. It stayed exactly the same, gentle, steady, unconcerned with whether she noticed it again tomorrow. It wasn't there to persuade her or push her toward a decision. It wasn't there to compete with anything else. It simply existed. Priya realized how much trust that required. To speak without urgency, to offer guidance without force, to wait without fear of being ignored. She thought about how often she'd overridden that voice in the past, not because it was wrong, but because it was subtle. Because it didn't come wrapped in certainty or approval. Because it didn't sound like anyone else. But lying here now, she could feel the difference between what calmed her and what agitated her. Between what felt aligned and what felt imposed. The quiet voice didn't make her anxious. It didn't make her feel behind. It made her feel settled. Priya shifted slightly, pulling the blanket higher. The fabric brushed her chin, warm and familiar. Her thoughts wandered, but they no longer demanded answers. They drifted like loose threads, not problems to solve. She remembered moments when she'd followed that inner sense without knowing why, choosing a path that didn't make sense to others, saying no when yes would have been easier, leaving something that looked good on the outside but felt wrong on the inside. Those moments hadn't always been comfortable, but they had been honest. The quiet voice wasn't always about comfort. It was about truth. And truth, she realized, didn't need to shout to be real. Her hand rested lightly on her stomach, fingers relaxed. She felt the subtle movement of breath beneath her palm. This body knew things too. It tightened when something was off. It softened when something was right. It had been speaking all along. Priya smiled faintly, not at a thought, but at the realization that she wasn't broken for feeling uncertain. She hadn't lost her way. She had simply been listening in the wrong direction for a while. The noise of the day faded further. Tomorrow didn't press in. The past loosened its grip. There was only this moment, quiet, unremarkable, complete. She didn't promise herself she'd always listen better from now on. She didn't turn the insight into a rule or a goal. She knew the noise would return. It always did. But now she also knew where to find herself when it did. The quiet voice didn't leave. It stayed beneath everything like a steady current under the surface. Always there, always accessible, never demanding, Priya's eyes remained closed as sleep began to approach, not abruptly, but gradually. Her thoughts thinned, stretched, then softened into something less defined. The last clear sensation she noticed was a feeling of trust, not in outcomes, not in certainty, but in her own inner rhythm. The world could keep talking. She knew how to listen inward now, and that was enough to rest. There was an extra chair pulled up to the kitchen island, and no one was sitting in it. It hadn't been there earlier in the day. Earlier, the space was tight, crowded with bags, mail, a half-empty water bottle, a laptop pushed to one side. Everything had a place, and that place was usually right where the hands could reach it. Nothing was meant to rest. Everything was meant to be ready. Now, it was late. The overhead light was off, leaving only the small yellow lamp above the sink. The dishwasher hummed in its steady, forgettable way, like a sound the house made when it was allowed to take care of itself. Outside, a car passed once, then the street went quiet again. The chair was plain, wooden, nothing special. It had been pulled over almost without thinking, just slid across the floor until it faced the island. The person standing there didn't sit down right away. They leaned against the counter instead, arms crossed, shoulders lifted a little higher than necessary. All day, there had been things to hold. A meeting that needed preparation, a message that couldn't be ignored, a problem that wasn't technically theirs, but somehow still ended up in their hands. Even dinner had been eaten quickly, standing up fork, resting on the edge of the sink between bites. There was always a sense that if they stopped moving, something might fall apart. The body remembered that feeling now, even though the day was technically over. The shoulders stayed tight. The jaw didn't quite unclench. The mind kept scanning like it was still on duty, waiting for the next thing that might need attention. The empty chair didn't ask for anything. It just stayed where it was. For a moment, the person noticed an odd irritation rise up. The chair felt unnecessary, in the way, like a pause that hadn't been earned yet. There was still tomorrow to think about, still loose ends, still that quiet pressure to be useful, to prove something even to an empty room. They reached for a mug and filled it with water, then set it down on the island without drinking. The dishwasher hummed. A soft click came from somewhere inside it, a small mechanical decision being made without any help. There was a memory, faint but persistent, of being younger and being told to wait, to stand back, to make room. Someone else needed the seat more. Someone else mattered more in that moment. It wasn't said cruelly. It didn't have to be. It was just the way things were arranged. Over time, standing became normal, hovering, being ready, being available. The chair scraped softly as it was pulled back a few inches. The sound was louder than expected in the quiet kitchen. The person paused, hands still on the top rail, as if surprised by their own movement. They sat down slowly. At first it felt wrong, too exposed, like sitting meant admitting something they weren't sure they were allowed to admit yet. The back of the chair pressed gently between the shoulder blades. The feet found the floor. The body registered contact, weight, support. Nothing dramatic happened. The room didn't change. The to-do list didn't disappear. Tomorrow didn't cancel itself. But something inside the chest loosened just enough to be noticeable. It's strange how unfamiliar rest can feel when you haven't practiced it in a while. Not the kind of rest that comes from collapsing at the end of the day, but the kind that comes from choosing to stop before you're forced to. The kind that says, just for now, this is enough. The person noticed how the island looked from this angle, how the edge was worn smooth in one spot, how a small crumb had been missed during cleaning. Ordinary details suddenly visible when the body wasn't leaning forward anymore. They rested their hands on their thighs. The fingers twitched once, like they were checking whether they were allowed to be empty. The mind tried out of habit to fill the space. You should answer that email. You forgot to follow up. You could be doing more right now. The thoughts arrived the way they always did, lined up and confident, like they belonged there. But tonight they didn't land quite as hard. It was as if the chair absorbed some of the impact. As if having a place to sit gave the body permission not to obey every instruction immediately. There is a quiet kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much, but from never letting yourself arrive anywhere. From always being slightly ahead of the moment you're in, reaching for the next thing before this one is even settled. The person noticed their breathing, not in a deliberate way, just noticed that it had slowed. The inhale wasn't rushed. The exhale went a little longer than expected, like the body was surprised it had the time. The empty chair across from them stayed empty. It didn't accuse, it didn't compare. It didn't ask them to earn the right to be there. It simply marked a space where effort wasn't required. For the first time that evening, the person let their shoulders drop fully. Not all at once, just a fraction. Enough to feel the difference. Enough to realize how high they'd been holding them all day without noticing. They stayed there longer than they meant to. Not because they were trying to heal anything. Not because they were making a point. Just because for once, nothing was pulling them away. And somewhere in that quiet kitchen with the dishwasher humming and the extra chair holding its place, a small truth settled in. Without words, a maybe rest isn't something you get after everything is done. Maybe it's something you're allowed to take, even when the world keeps going. They didn't stay seated the whole time. After a while, they stood up again, almost out of habit. Rinsed the mug in the sink, wiped a small spill on the counter. The body still knew its routines, still wanted to be useful, still wanted to justify its presence by doing something that looked productive. But when they were done, they didn't rush away. They pulled the chair back again. This time the movement felt less strange, less like stealing time, more like returning to a place that had been there all along. Sitting down didn't feel dramatic anymore. It felt normal, which surprised them. The dishwasher clicked and shifted into a new cycle. A deeper, slower hum filled the kitchen, like the house had decided to settle for the night. The lamp over the sink cast a soft shadow on the wall, uneven and imperfect. Nothing in the room looked curated or impressive. It just looked lived in. From this stillness, another thought surfaced. Not sharp, not demanding, just quiet and persistent. What if I don't have to earn my place here? The idea felt unfamiliar, almost irresponsible. Somewhere along the way, rest had become something that had to be justified. You rest after you finish. You sit once you've proven your value. You stop only when there's nothing left that could possibly need you. But there was always something left. The person thought about how often they'd made space for others without hesitation. Pulled out chairs, adjusted schedules, listened longer than they had energy for, said yes even when their body was already tired. It wasn't resentment they felt now, just a soft recognition of a pattern that had been running quietly for years. They had learned to be the one who stands by, stands in, stands ready. And over time, standing became part of how they measured their worth. If they were needed, they mattered. If they were useful, they belonged. Sitting down felt like disappearing. The empty chair across from them broke that spell a little. It was still there, still unoccupied, still unnecessary in the most ordinary way. And yet it held something important, the idea that space doesn't have to be taken from someone else to exist, that making room for yourself doesn't mean pushing anyone out. The person rested their elbows lightly on the island. The cool surface grounded them. They noticed how the day had finally reached their hands and feet. How tiredness, when allowed to arrive, felt different from exhaustion. Softer, more honest. There's a difference between being worn down and being allowed to stop. They had mistaken one for the other for a long time. The mind tried again to fill the quiet. You could be better than this. You should be further along. Other people don't need this much rest. The thoughts came, but now they were quieter, less convincing, like echoes in a room that had already emptied. The person didn't argue with them, didn't correct them, didn't try to replace them with something more positive. They just let the thoughts pass through the way sound passes through a space, without leaving marks on the walls. They stayed seated. The chair held their weight without comment. In that simple support, something shifted. Not in a way that demanded attention, just enough to change the tone of the evening. The pressure to be impressive softened. The need to justify their existence loosened its grip. They didn't suddenly feel confident or healed or whole in some dramatic sense. They just felt present. And present, it turned out, was enough for the night. The value they had been chasing all day wasn't missing. It hadn't been delayed or denied. It had just been quiet, waiting for them to stop running long enough to notice it. Value didn't come from what they completed, or how much they carried, or how little space they took up. It was already there in the body, sitting in the chair, in the breath moving without effort, in the simple fact of being here, even when nothing was being produced. They looked once more at the empty chair across from them and understood it differently now. It wasn't empty because no one deserved it. It was empty because there was finally room. Room to sit without proving anything. Room to rest without explanation. Room to exist without performing. Eventually, they would stand again. Turn off the lamp. Walk down the hallway. Tomorrow would come as it always did, with its lists and demands and small urgencies. But something would go with them. The memory of that chair. The feel of being supported without conditions. The quiet knowing that their worth hadn't changed based on how much they did. And even when the chair was pushed back under the table, even when the kitchen returned to its usual arrangement, that space would still exist. Not in the room, but inside them. A place they could return to, a place that didn't need to be earned. The garden was smaller than they remembered. Not tiny, not disappointing, just quieter. Tucked behind the house, partly hidden by a leaning fence and a line of bushes that had grown uneven over the years. In the daytime, it was easy to overlook. From the kitchen window, it looked like nothing special. Just dirt, some green, a few stubborn patches where weeds had taken over. But at night, with the string lights turned on and the air cooling down, it felt like a different place. They stepped outside barefoot, the wood of the deck cool under their feet. The door closed softly behind them, and the sounds of the house faded. Inside, there were still reminders, phones, messages, unfinished thoughts. But out here, the night held things more gently. They hadn't planned to come into the garden. Earlier, they'd been scrolling on the couch phone glowing in the dim living room, watching other lives unfold in neat rectangles, smiling faces, announcements, new beginnings that looked clean and confident. Each swipe carried a quiet question. Why does everyone else seem so ready? The feeling wasn't jealousy exactly, more like a soft ache. A sense of being behind or unfinished or not quite ready to be seen. So they stood up without much thought, slipped on a sweater, and stepped outside. The garden didn't greet them. It didn't offer comfort or answers. It just existed. Leaves rustled lightly in the breeze. Somewhere nearby, a sprinkler clicked on and off its rhythm, steady and unconcerned. They walked slowly along the narrow path, noticing details they usually ignored. A plant that had grown sideways, leaning toward the light. Soil that had dried and cracked near the edges. A corner where nothing had taken root at all. It was clear they hadn't been tending this place much. Life had been full lately, full of adjusting to other people's needs, full of trying to be open, available, understanding, full of letting others in before they were sure they themselves felt steady. There was a time when they believed healing happened through connection alone, through being chosen, through being seen by someone else and held there long enough to feel real again. But standing in the garden now, they noticed something simple and uncomfortable at the same time. Nothing here was growing because someone else liked it. Nothing here was blooming for approval. The garden didn't perform. They knelt down near a small patch of soil, brushing their fingers across the surface. It was dry, but not dead. Beneath the top layer, there was still coolness, still potential. They could feel it. A memory surfaced of inviting people in too soon, of sharing tender parts before they had learned how to protect them, of hoping someone else would know what to do with the pieces they themselves didn't yet understand. The intention had always been good. They weren't careless. They were just eager to feel whole again, eager to skip the slow part. They reached for the watering can resting against the fence. It was lighter than expected. nearly empty. They filled it halfway from the hose, listening as the water rushed in, then slowed. As they poured, the soil darkened instantly. The change was visible, immediate, satisfying in a quiet way. No one was watching. No one needed to know this was happening. It felt different from the effort they usually made. Usually, care was outward-facing. A text sent at the right time, a thoughtful response, a version of themselves shaped to fit the moment. That kind of care took energy and left very little behind. This kind of care stayed. They moved slowly, watering only where it was needed. Not everything at once. Just one section, then another. The sprinkler down the street kept ticking, a steady backdrop, like a reminder that growth doesn't rush even when no one is paying attention. As they worked, a thought formed, not sharp, not demanding. What if this space is meant for me first? Not as a rule, not as a boundary shouted out loud, just as a quiet order of things. Care inward, then outward. Roots before invitations. They realized how often they treated themselves like a shared space. Open hours, no clear edges. Anyone could enter any time. And when something was damaged, they blamed themselves for not being stronger. But gardens don't work that way. You don't invite people in while you're still planting seeds and expect them not to step on anything. You don't leave the gate wide open during a storm and wonder why things get uprooted. You tend. You protect. You learn the rhythm of the place. Only then do you open it. They set the watering can down and sat back on their heels. The air smelled faintly of wet earth. Crickets had started their low, uneven song. The lights above cast soft circles on the ground, leaving the rest in shadow. Nothing dramatic had changed. No sudden clarity. No feeling of being fully healed. But something had shifted. The garden felt less like something they were neglecting and more like something that was waiting. Patient. Unoffended. Ready to respond when given attention. They stayed there longer than they expected, hands resting loosely in their lap, watching the soil absorb what it needed. For the first time in a while, the urge to reach outward to check messages, to see who was thinking of them, to look for reassurance didn't feel so urgent. There was work to do here. Quiet work. Work that didn't ask to be witnessed. And for tonight, that felt like enough. They didn't fix everything that night. Some weeds were still there. Some patches stayed bare. The fence still leaned a little to the left, and one of the lights flickered when the breeze picked up. The garden didn't suddenly become beautiful in the way pictures online tend to be. And somehow, that made it easier to stay. They rinsed their hands with the hose and stood up slowly, feeling the stretch in their knees, the weight of their body settling back into itself. The soil clung lightly to their fingers, a quiet reminder that they'd been here, that they'd touched something real. As they walked the path again, they noticed where the ground dipped, where the stones didn't quite line up. These weren't flaws exactly, just signs of use, of time. It occurred to them that healing might look more like this than they'd expected. Not a reset, not a clean slate, just learning the shape of what's already there and caring for it without asking it to be different first. They sat on the low step at the edge of the garden, pulling the sweater tighter around their shoulders. The air had cooled enough to raise a light chill on their skin. Somewhere nearby, the sprinklers shut off, leaving behind a deeper kind of quiet. For a moment, they imagined inviting someone into this space. Not as a test, not as a hope that being chosen would fix something. Just as an offering made from a place that wasn't starving anymore. The image felt different from the ones they'd carried before. There was no urgency in it. No sense of please stay or don't leave. Just a calm curiosity about what it might be like to share something that was already tended. They realized how often they'd mistaken openness for healing. They'd believed that if they let people see everything, every crack, every fear, every unfinished piece, then closeness would come naturally. And sometimes it did. But often it came with confusion, with overstepping, with the quiet resentment that followed when their softness wasn't handled gently. It wasn't that others had done something wrong. It was that the garden hadn't been ready. They had opened the gate before learning how to care for the soil, before understanding which plants needed shade, which needed space, which ones grew slowly and couldn't be rushed. Sitting there now, they felt something soften in the way they thought about themselves. They hadn't failed at healing. They hadn't loved the wrong way. They had simply been tending outward before tending inward. And that wasn't a flaw, just an order that needed adjusting. They stood again and walked to the gate, resting their hand on the latch. It creaked softly under their touch. They didn't open it. They didn't close it tighter either. They just felt its weight the way it could move when asked. Choice felt like that sometimes. Not a decision shouted into the world, but a hand resting on a latch, aware that movement was possible. The lights overhead hummed faintly. A moth circled once, then disappeared into the dark. The garden breathed in its own quiet way, alive, but not demanding. They thought about tomorrow, about conversations that might happen, about invitations they might receive or offer. For the first time, those thoughts didn't feel heavy. They didn't need to decide anything tonight. Healing they were learning didn't ask for big promises. It asked for small, consistent care. For showing up in the same place again and again, even when no one else was there to notice. Before going inside, they turned back once more. The garden looked different now, not because it had changed, but because they had. It wasn't a place to escape into. It was a place to return to, a place that held them without needing anything in exchange. Inside the house, the couch and phone and familiar noises waited. Life would continue. Connections would form and fade, as they always did. But there was a quiet understanding they carried with them as they stepped back inside. They didn't need to be fully healed to be worthy. They didn't need to be chosen to be whole. Their value wasn't waiting outside the gate. It was already rooted here. The parking lot was almost empty. Just a few cars scattered across the far rows, their windshields catching the last light of the day. The grocery store sign hummed faintly behind them, steady and indifferent. Somewhere near the entrance, a cart rattled as someone pushed it back into place. the sound echoing longer than it should have. They sat in their car with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, not quite ready to go anywhere. Earlier, the day had fallen apart in a quiet way. No shouting, no dramatic ending. Just a short conversation that didn't go the way they'd hoped. A polite tone, a careful explanation. Words like, unfortunately, and at this time. The kind of ending that leaves no clear edge to push against, no one to blame. Not even yourself yet, somehow still leaves a heaviness behind. Failure doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it slips in gently dressed as a reasonable outcome. They'd nodded, thanked the person on the other end, closed the laptop, done all the right things. And still the feeling followed them out the door, into the car, into the long pause before turning the key. Now the sky was changing. A thick layer of clouds hung low, dull and gray, like they'd been there all day. But near the horizon, something else was happening. A thin band of light pushed through soft and warm, coloring the edges of the clouds in pale gold. The sun hadn't disappeared. It had just been hidden. They noticed how quickly their mind had jumped to conclusions earlier. This means I'm not good enough. This proves I waited too long. This sets me back more than I can afford. The thoughts came fast, stacking on top of one another, each one sounding certain, final. As if one moment could define the shape of an entire life. They leaned forward and wiped a small smudge from the inside of the windshield with their sleeve. The glass cleared just enough to sharpen the view. The light grew brighter for a second, then shifted again as the clouds moved. It occurred to them that the sun didn't argue with the clouds. It didn't rush them, didn't burn through them, didn't take their presence personally. It simply stayed where it was doing what it always did. There had been other days like this before. Other moments that felt like proof of something going wrong. And yet, looking back, those moments hadn't erased who they were. They hadn't taken away their ability to learn to try again, to show up differently next time. But in the middle of it, it never felt that way. In the middle of it, the clouds felt permanent. They remembered being younger, equating success with visibility. If something was seen, it mattered. If it wasn't acknowledged, it didn't count. Praise felt like sunlight. Silence felt like disappearance. Over time, that belief hardened. They learned to track their worth through outcomes, through approvals, through signs that others could see and name. So when something didn't work out, it didn't just feel disappointing. It felt like dimming. They sat back in the seat, feeling the cool fabric against their shoulders. The car next to them pulled out slowly, tires crunching against loose gravel. For a moment, the lot was quiet again. The sky kept changing. The clouds drifted, reshaping themselves without effort. Light slid along their edges, sometimes bright, sometimes barely there. The scene refused to settle into a single interpretation. They took a breath, not deep, not intentional. Just the kind that happens when the body realizes it's safe to pause. What if this moment isn't saying anything about my value? The thought surprised them. Not because it felt obviously true, but because it felt possible. They had been treating the outcome like a verdict, a final word. But maybe it was closer to weather. Something that passed through, something that changed conditions without changing the sky itself. They thought about how often they'd admired resilience in others, how they'd watched people move through setbacks and still remain themselves, still kind, still capable, still worthy of respect even when things didn't go their way. Somehow, it had never occurred to them that the same might apply inward. The light near the horizon deepened, turning amber, then soft orange. For a brief moment, the clouds looked almost translucent, like thin fabric held up to a lamp. They felt a familiar ache in their chest, not sharp, just heavy. A mix of disappointment and tiredness. They didn't push it away, didn't label it as weakness. They let it sit there like the clouds sat in the sky. Failure, they were realizing, doesn't erase what came before it. It doesn't cancel effort. It doesn't rewrite your entire story unless you let it. It only blocks the view for a while. They stayed in the car longer than they needed to, watching the sky dim slowly, the colors fading into blue-gray. The sun slipped fully behind the clouds, now no longer visible at all. And still, they knew it was there. They turned the key but didn't drive off right away. The dashboard lights came on softly, casting a pale glow across the inside of the car. The radio stayed off. The world outside felt quiet enough on its own. The sky had lost most of its color, now settling into a calm, even gray. The disappointment was still there. It hadn't gone anywhere, but it no longer felt like an emergency. There's a difference between pain that needs fixing and pain that just needs space. For a long time, they had treated every uncomfortable feeling like a problem to solve. If something hurt, it must mean something was wrong with them. If they felt stuck, it must mean they had failed in some essential way. Sitting there, watching the clouds thicken, they began to sense another option. Maybe this feeling didn't need a solution. Maybe it just needed permission to pass through. They thought about how often they had confused visibility with value. How praise felt like sunlight and silence felt like being erased. How easily one unanswered email could undo weeks of steady work in their mind. It wasn't that they believed others were shallow. It was that they had learned to see themselves through the same narrow lens. Outcome equals worth. Progress equals proof. Setback equals something missing. Those rules had never been spoken out loud, but they had shaped the way they moved through the world all the same. The clouds above continued their slow drift. Some thickened, some thinned. None of them stayed exactly as they were. The sun didn't fight them. It didn't try to shine harder to compensate. It didn't dim itself in response. It simply remained. The thought landed gently. What if my value is like that? Not something that appears only when conditions are perfect. Not something that has to be proven each time it's questioned. Just something that exists steady and unchanged, whether or not it's being seen. They felt a subtle shift in their chest. Not relief exactly, more like steadiness. The kind that comes when you stop arguing with what is. They had done their part. They had shown up. they had tried, the outcome was only one small piece of a much larger movement, one moment in a longer cycle. They started the car fully this time and eased out of the parking space. As they drove, the headlights cut through the dim evening, illuminating patches of road, one at a time. They didn't need to see the whole way, just the next few feet. That felt familiar. So much of their life had unfolded like this already, step by step. Light reaching only so far ahead. Trust built not from certainty, but from motion. A red light caught them at the edge of the lot. They stopped and waited. The clouds above were darker now, but the air felt cooler, calmer. They noticed how their breath matched the rhythm of the drive. Inhale at the stop. Exhale as the car rolled forward again. The body knew how to move through this, even if the mind still had questions. There would be other attempts, other conversations, other moments where things didn't go as planned. That wasn't a sign of deficiency. It was a sign of being in motion. Failure, when seen clearly, wasn't the opposite of worth. It was simply part of the weather. And weather changes. They merged onto the road streetlights passing overhead in a steady pattern. Each one lit up the windshield briefly, then disappeared behind them. The repetition was comforting, predictable in a way that didn't demand attention. They didn't feel triumphant. They didn't suddenly feel confident or resolved. They just felt intact, still themselves, still capable, still worthy of being here exactly as they were. The clouds could stay as long as they needed to. The sun wasn't going anywhere. Some kinds of tiredness don't come from doing too much. They come from quietly believing you're still not enough. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a my life is falling apart way. Just a low, steady feeling that you need to keep proving yourself. Keep earning your place. Keep fixing something about who you are. Chris had lived with that feeling for years. He was 42, worked in IT support for a mid-sized company. The kind of job where people only noticed you when something went wrong. Most days he moved through tickets and emails quietly, fixing other people's problems, resetting passwords, keeping systems running so smoothly no one had to think about them. By the end of the day, his shoulders always felt a little tight, like they were holding something up even after work was done. That evening, Chris sat at his small desk in the corner of his apartment. The overhead light was off. Only a desk lamp was on, casting a soft circle of light across the wood surface. Outside traffic hummed in the distance, steady and far away, like the city breathing on its own. His laptop was open, but he wasn't really looking at it. An inbox sat half cleared. A few messages he meant to answer later. Nothing urgent, nothing on fire. Still, his chest felt restless. Chris leaned back in his chair and reached for the hoodie hanging on the back. It was old, soft, the kind of hoodie you don't throw away because it still feels like home. As he pulled it on, his fingers brushed against something inside the pocket. He paused. There was a small weight there, familiar but unexpected. Chris slid his hand into the pocket and pulled out a coin. Not a valuable one, just a worn, slightly scratched coin he'd carried around for years without thinking much about it. A friend had given it to him a long time ago after a rough patch, saying something like, "Just keep it with you. You don't need a reason." Chris rolled the coin between his fingers. The metal was warm now, shaped slightly by time. He couldn't remember the last time he'd actually noticed it. It was strange how something could be with you for so long and still feel forgotten. He held the coin in his palm and let his hand rest on the desk. The lamplight caught the edges, dull but steady. Nothing special to look at. Nothing that would impress anyone. And yet, there it was. Present. Real. Already his. Chris didn't think anything profound. He didn't suddenly feel confident or healed. But something inside him slowed just a little. All day he had been moving through the world as if he needed permission to take up space. As if his worth depended on being useful, being needed, being noticed at the right moments. Sitting there now, he noticed how automatic that habit was. How easily his mind went to questions like, did I do enough today? Did I say the right thing? Did anyone really see me? None of those questions felt loud. They were quiet, practiced, almost polite. Chris closed his hand gently around the coin, not squeezing it, just holding it, feeling its shape against his skin. There's a story in old traditions about someone who wandered for years, poor and exhausted, begging for scraps, never realizing that a priceless jewel had been sewn into the lining of his own clothing the whole time. Chris didn't know that story. He didn't need to. He only felt the simple truth of the moment. Nothing had changed about him in the last 10 minutes. He hadn't achieved anything, hadn't fixed himself, hadn't become more impressive. And yet sitting there, he didn't feel as empty as before. He set the coin back into the pocket and zipped the hoodie halfway up. The fabric brushed against his neck, familiar and grounding. He rested his elbows on the desk and let his gaze soften, not really focused on anything in particular. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere, a door closed. Life kept moving without asking anything from him. Chris noticed his breathing without trying to control it. In and out. A little slower now. A little deeper, without effort. It occurred to him that maybe his exhaustion didn't come from lacking something. Maybe it came from constantly reaching for what was already here. The thought didn't demand agreement. It didn't try to convince him. It simply passed through like a quiet observation and left space behind it. Chris leaned back again, chair creaking softly. He didn't rush to stand up, didn't rush to do anything at all. For the first time that evening, he let himself be exactly as he was, without adding a silent requirement to improve. Chris stayed there for a while longer, not doing anything in particular. The desk lamp hummed faintly, the kind of sound you only notice when the room gets quiet enough. His laptop screen dimmed on its own, then went dark. He didn't reach out to wake it. The room felt softer without the light from the screen. Shadows settled into their places. Nothing demanded his attention. He stood up slowly and walked toward the window. The glass was cool when he rested his fingertips against it. Down below, a few apartment lights were still on. Others had gone dark. People ending their days in their own quiet ways. Chris had spent years believing that value came from being seen, from being useful. from being the one who had the answer when something broke. But standing there now, he noticed how none of that was required in this moment. The world wasn't asking him to prove anything. It was just continuing. He let his forehead rest lightly against the window for a second, then stepped back. The hoodie hung loosely on his shoulders. The pocket felt heavier than it should have, not because the coin weighed much, but because he was finally aware of it. He moved to the couch and sat down, letting his body sink into the cushions. The fabric creaked softly, then settled. One leg tucked under the other without him thinking about it. His arms rested at his sides, hands open. It was strange how unfamiliar that felt. Open hands, not holding onto a task, not gripping a thought. A memory floated up uninvited. A younger version of himself trying to be quieter, trying not to take up space, learning early that approval felt like safety. The memory didn't sting. It didn't need analysis. It just passed through like a shadow moving across the floor. Chris noticed something else then. Even in the middle of all those years of trying, something in him had never actually been missing. Tired, yes, doubting often, but not broken. The coin in his pocket hadn't made him valuable. It hadn't changed who he was. It had simply reminded him of something that was already true. He closed his eyes for a moment. Not to meditate, just to rest them. The room didn't disappear. It stayed steady and quiet around him. His breathing found its own rhythm. In through the nose, out through the mouth. No counting, no correction. Just the body doing what it knows how to do when it's allowed to stop performing. Thoughts came and went. A half-formed plan for tomorrow, a grocery list, a line from a song he couldn't quite remember. None of them stayed long. None of them needed an answer. There was a gentle relief in realizing that wholeness didn't feel like excitement. It felt like not having to reach anymore. Chris shifted slightly on the couch and felt the coin press against his hip. He smiled barely. Not because it was meaningful, but because it was simple. So much of his life had been spent looking outward, measuring himself against reactions, responses, silence. Tonight there was nothing to measure. The city sounds faded further into the background. A car door slammed somewhere far away. Then, nothing again. He stood up and walked toward the bedroom. He didn't bring his phone, didn't bring his thoughts about tomorrow. Just his body a little heavier in a good way, like something finally set down. When he lay on the bed, he didn't try to arrange himself perfectly. He let the mattress meet him where it did. The sheets were cool at first, then warm. His shoulders sank. His jaw loosened. The jewel in the pocket stayed where it was. It didn't need to be taken out. It didn't need to be admired. Some things don't need attention to keep shining. They just need to stop being forgotten. Chris breathed in once more, slowly, and let the breath go without holding on to it. Nothing needed to be added. Nothing needed to be earned. Nothing was missing. The night held everything else. Some people don't lose themselves loudly. They don't rebel. They don't fall apart. They simply learn how to shrink. Omar learned that early. He was 28, worked as a personal trainer at a local gym, the kind of place with mirrors everywhere and music that never quite turned off. From the outside, he looked confident, strong, put together. The kind of guy people assumed had things figured out. Inside, he moved carefully. Not because he was afraid exactly, more because he had learned slowly, quietly, that it was safer not to take up too much space. Safer not to want too much. Safer not to show too much of whatever lived underneath the muscles and routines. That night, after his last client left, Omar stepped outside and started walking. The gym lights buzzed behind him as the door closed. The street was calmer than usual. A few cars passed. Street lights stretched long shadows across the sidewalk. He kept his hands in the pockets of his jacket shoulders, slightly rounded forward. It was a posture he didn't remember choosing. His body had learned it on its own. As he walked, he replayed small moments from the day. A joke he didn't finish. A thought he didn't say out loud. A decision to stay agreeable instead of honest. None of it dramatic, just familiar. Omar crossed an intersection and slowed down near a quiet stretch of road lined with trees. The leaves barely moved. Somewhere a bus hissed as it pulled away. He stopped under a streetlight and leaned back against a pole, the cool metal pressing through his jacket. His chest rose and fell quickly at first, then settled. There was a tightness there. Not pain. More like something held in for a long time. Omar had been praised for being easy most of his life. Easygoing, easy to work with, easy to manage. It sounded like a compliment. It had felt like one. But over time, he noticed how often easy really meant quiet, smaller, less. He rolled his shoulders once, then again, trying to loosen them. The muscles responded slowly, like they weren't used to being asked to soften. Across the street, a stray cat darted from behind a parked car and disappeared into the shadows. Omar watched it go, then let his gaze drift upward. The night sky was darker here than near the gym. A few stars showed through the haze. Nothing dramatic, just enough to notice. He remembered something his grandfather had once said, half joking, half serious. If you raise a lion among sheep, it won't forget how to roar. It'll just forget when it's allowed. Omar hadn't thought about that in years. He wasn't angry. That surprised him. He'd expected anger to show up if he ever slowed down enough to feel what was underneath. But what he felt instead was weight. The kind that comes from holding back, not from being hurt. He pushed off the pole and started walking again, slower now. Each step landed more deliberately. His breath matched his pace without effort. As he walked, he noticed how often his mind tried to correct him. Don't get too big. Don't make it awkward. Don't push. Those thoughts weren't cruel. They were protective. Old. Well practiced. Omar didn't argue with them. He just noticed them the way you might notice background noise you've lived with for so long you forgot it was there. At the next corner, he stopped again. This time he closed his eyes briefly and took one deeper breath than usual. His chest expanded. His shoulders lifted slightly, then dropped. Nothing happened. No rush, no breakthrough. But something shifted. It felt like standing a little straighter, not to look confident, but because there was no reason to keep folding inward. Omar opened his eyes and looked down the street. The road stretched out empty and quiet. He could walk any direction he wanted. For the first time that night, he noticed how much strength it took to keep pretending to be smaller than you are, and how much energy might come back if you stopped. He didn't need to roar. He didn't need to prove anything. He just needed to stop acting like he was something he wasn't. Omar took another step forward, then another, letting his arms swing naturally at his sides. His hands came out of his pockets. His shoulders stayed relaxed. The lion hadn't disappeared. It had just been patient. And patience, he was beginning to realize, wasn't the same as weakness. Omar kept walking, not toward anything in particular. The street curved gently, guiding him without asking questions. His footsteps sounded different now, not louder, just steadier, like they belonged to him again. He passed a closed storefront, its windows' dark reflections faint. For a moment he caught sight of himself in the glass, the outline of his body, broad shoulders, solid frame, a presence that had always been there even when he tried to soften it. He didn't stop to look longer. He didn't need to. What surprised him most was how tired he felt, not the heavy exhaustion of a long day, but a softer kind. The kind that comes after you've been holding something in for a very long time and finally let your grip loosen. Omar slowed near a small park tucked between apartment buildings. The gate wasn't locked. He stepped inside and sat on a bench beneath a tree. The wood was cool. The air smelled faintly of leaves and damp earth. He rested his elbows on his thighs and let his hands hang loosely between his knees. Fingers relaxed, jaw relaxed, breath easy. For years he had thought that being himself meant being too much, too intense, too direct, too loud in a world that seemed to reward smooth edges and quiet compliance. So he learned how to blend, how to fit, how to keep his head down. But sitting there now, he realized something simple. The effort it took to shrink had been constant, invisible, but relentless. No one had asked him to disappear. He had just learned how. A breeze moved through the leaves above him, producing a soft, uneven rustle. Omar followed the sound with his attention, letting it rise and fall without naming it. His breathing slowed naturally, syncing with the rhythm around him. There was no sudden clarity, no declaration of identity, just the sense that something old had been set down beside him on the bench. He remembered moments he had almost forgotten, times when he laughed too loudly and then quickly checked himself, times when he wanted to speak and swallowed the words instead, times when his body felt powerful, alive, and he immediately toned it down so no one would feel uncomfortable. None of those memories hurt tonight. They felt distant, like scenes from a movie he no longer needed to rewatch. Omar leaned back against the bench and looked up at the branches. A few stars peeked through the gaps. Not many, just enough. A lion doesn't need to roar to know what it is. It doesn't rehearse its strength. It doesn't apologize for its size. That truth settled in quietly. Omar noticed how calm his body felt when he stopped trying to manage how he appeared. when he wasn't anticipating reactions, when he wasn't adjusting himself in advance. It wasn't confidence. It was relief. He stood up and left the park, walking back toward his apartment. The streets felt familiar again, but softer, less like a stage, more like a place to pass through. At his door, he paused, keys in hand, not because he was hesitating, just because he could. Inside, the apartment greeted him with stillness. He kicked off his shoes and left them where they landed. The lights stayed off. The darkness didn't feel heavy. Omar moved through the space and sat on the edge of his bed. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, and let his head drop slightly. A long breath escaped him unplanned. His shoulders lowered another inch. He realized then that reclaiming himself didn't require a performance. It didn't require confrontation or explanation. It only required permission he could give himself. To stand as he was. To breathe as he was. To exist without translation. Omar lay back and stared at the ceiling. The room was quiet enough that he could hear his own breathing. Slow, even, unforced. The lion didn't need to prove it wasn't a sheep. It just needed to stop pretending. As sleep approached, Omar felt something unfamiliar and deeply welcome. Not excitement, not pride, ease. And in that ease, the body remembered what it had always known. Nothing was wrong with him. Nothing ever had been. The night held him there gently, without expectation. There are nights when loneliness doesn't feel sharp. It feels quiet. Like a room with the lights off, where you can still sense the outlines of everything, but nothing reaches back. Grace knew that kind of quiet well. She was 62, a librarian in a small town, the kind of person who moved through the day, gently returning books to their places, speaking softly, keeping things in order without making a show of it. People liked her. People trusted her. But most days, by the time she locked the library doors and drove home, the world's attention felt like it had already moved on to somewhere else. That evening, she didn't turn on the TV. She didn't scroll her phone. She made a cup of tea and carried it out to the porch, where a single porch light glowed warm against the dark. The air was cool enough to wake the skin, but not cold enough to hurt. Somewhere, crickets kept their steady rhythm. A neighbor's dog barked once, then stopped as if even it didn't want to disturb the night for too long. Grace sat down on the porch steps, teacup warming her hands. The chair beside her stayed empty. Not in a dramatic way, just in the quiet, ordinary way that empty chairs can be. A few years ago, the empty chair had felt unbearable. She would notice it immediately, like a missing tooth. Now it simply existed, a fact. A shape in the room. Still, sometimes she wondered what her life looked like from the outside. Quiet job, quiet house, quiet evenings. She didn't feel sad all the time. She didn't feel broken. She just felt unseen. Not by one person in particular. Not in a way that could be fixed with a text message. More like the feeling that if she disappeared from the world for a few days, the world would continue without much pause. Grace took a slow sip of tea. It was too hot, and she smiled at herself for forgetting that part. She set the cup down beside her and rubbed her thumb over the rim, feeling the smooth ceramic. Across the small yard near the fence line, something pale caught her eye. A faint patch of color in the dark. She leaned forward, squinting. Earlier that week, she had thrown a handful of mixed seeds into the soil near the fence, not really expecting anything. A neighbor had mentioned wildflowers offhand, saying they made the yard feel less lonely. Grace had nodded politely, then bought a small packet at the hardware store on her way home from work. She hadn't told anyone. It wasn't a project. It wasn't self-improvement. It was just a small thing to do with her hands. Now, in the porch light and the thin moonlight, she could see that something had actually grown. A few small flowers had opened simple, bright faces, looking up into the dark as if the night didn't bother them at all. Grace stood up slowly and walked into the yard, careful not to step on the little patch of new life. The grass was cool under her feet. The earth smelled damp, honest. She crouched near the flowers and looked closer. They weren't dramatic flowers. Not the kind people buy at expensive shops. Not roses, not orchids. These were the kind that show up in empty lots, along highways in places no one points at. And yet here they were, open, bright, completely unconcerned with whether anyone noticed. Grace felt something loosen in her chest. Not a big release, just a softening, as if a tight knot had been sitting there quietly and finally stopped pulling. She stayed crouched there, looking at them. The petals were delicate, slightly uneven. The stems thin but upright. They didn't look like they were trying to be anything else. It struck her in the simplest way that they hadn't grown to be admired. They had grown because that's what they do. Grace thought about how often she measured her own life by outside signals, invitations, messages, praise at work, people remembering her birthday, people needing her. And when those signals didn't come, she assumed something about herself. Maybe I'm not interesting. Maybe I'm not important. Maybe I'm not enough. The wildflowers didn't seem to ask those questions. They didn't bend toward applause. They didn't wait for permission. They simply opened. Grace reached out and touched one petal with the tip of her finger. It was cool and soft, almost weightless. The flower didn't flinch. It didn't change its mind. It remained what it was. A car passed far away, headlights sweeping faintly across the fence. Then the darkness returned to its steady shape. Grace sat back on her heels and let herself breathe. In and out, slow, natural breaths that didn't ask anything from her. She realized she had been living as if her value depended on being witnessed, as if beauty required an audience, as if a life only mattered when someone else reflected it back to her. But the small patch of wildflowers didn't need a mirror. Grace stood up and went back to the porch. She picked up her tea again, now warm instead of hot. She sat down on the step and looked out at the yard. The empty chair was still empty. The night was still quiet. And yet something felt different. Not in the circumstances, in her chest. She didn't feel fixed. She didn't feel suddenly fulfilled. She just felt less needy for proof. The wildflowers continued to hold their small brightness in the dark, like a gentle reminder you didn't have to fight for your own worth. Sometimes Grace thought the most honest kind of beauty is the kind that keeps blooming even when no one is watching. And maybe that kind of blooming was allowed for her too. Grace stayed on the porch for a long while after that, long enough for the night to deepen around her. The crickets settled into a slower rhythm. The air cooled just enough that she pulled her sweater closer around her shoulders. Not because she was cold, but because the weight felt comforting. She watched the small patch of wildflowers from where she sat. They were harder to see now, their colors muted in the dark, but she knew they were still there, still open, still doing what they had done all day without interruption. Grace noticed how often she had lived as if she were on pause, waiting for someone to notice her effort, waiting for an invitation, waiting for a sign that her life was meaningful in some measurable way. She had waited quietly, politely, the way she had learned to do most things. But sitting there now, she realized something gentle and surprising. The waiting itself had been exhausting. Not because it was dramatic, but because it kept her turned outward, scanning for reassurance instead of resting in what already existed. She took another sip of tea and let the warmth spread through her chest. The night didn't rush her. The yard didn't ask her to be different. Even the empty chair beside her felt neutral now, no longer a symbol of lack. Just a piece of furniture holding its place. Grace thought about the wildflowers again. How they had grown without certainty, without feedback, without an audience to tell them they were doing it right. They hadn't bloomed for the night. They had bloomed in it. That difference felt important. She stood up slowly and walked back into the yard, careful with her steps. The grass brushed against her ankles. She stopped near the flowers once more and knelt down, resting her hands on her thighs. Up close, she could see tiny imperfections she hadn't noticed before. A petal with a small tear, a stem slightly bent, a flower that hadn't fully opened yet. None of it looked wrong. Grace felt a quiet recognition move through her. Her own life had been like that too, uneven, unremarkable in places, still unfolding in others. She had spent so much time believing she needed to be more finished, more impressive, more clearly defined. But nothing here looked finished either. Nothing needed to be. She stayed there until her knees began to ache slightly, then rose and brushed the dirt from her palms. The flowers stayed where they were. They didn't need her attention to continue. Back inside, Grace moved through the house without turning on many lights. The familiar rooms felt softer in the dimness, edges less sharp, expectations lower. She washed her cup, listening to the quiet rush of water, then set it upside down to dry. In the bedroom, she paused by the window and looked out once more. The yard was mostly shadow now, the flowers invisible unless you knew where to look. She smiled to herself. So much of life, she realized, was like that. Present, alive, meaningful, whether or not it was clearly seen. Grace lay down and pulled the blanket up around her. The bed held her weight easily. Her breath slowed without instruction. The day, with all its small moments and quiet hours, began to loosen its grip. She didn't make any promises to herself, didn't vow to stop caring what people thought, didn't rewrite her story in her head. She simply let herself rest. Somewhere outside, the wildflowers stood in the dark, open and steady, not asking for approval, not dimming themselves because no one was watching. They would still be there in the morning. And so would she. Grace closed her eyes, carrying that thought with her, not as an affirmation, not as a lesson, but as a soft truth the body could understand. Nothing was missing. Nothing had to be proven. The night wrapped around the house, gentle and complete, and let everything be exactly as it was. Some evenings don't feel heavy because of what happened during the day. They feel heavy because of how you spoke to yourself while it was happening. Not out loud, just quietly in ways no one else could hear. Jasmine had gotten used to that voice. She was 34, worked as a real estate agent, and spent most of her days smiling, reassuring, adjusting her tone depending on who stood in front of her. Confidence was part of the job. Calm, too. People wanted to feel safe when they talked about homes, money, futures. Jasmine knew how to give them that feeling. What she rarely gave herself was the same kindness. That night she came home later than planned. Not late enough to be a problem, just late enough to feel the day lingering in her body. She slipped off her shoes, dropped her keys in the bowl by the door, and went straight to the bathroom without turning on the overhead lights. The small lamp above the mirror was enough. She turned on the faucet and washed her hands slowly, watching the water move over her skin. Clear, steady, predictable. The fan hummed softly above her, filling the room with a low, even sound. Jasmine looked up at the mirror without really meaning to. Her reflection stared back, familiar and slightly tired. Nothing wrong with it. Nothing remarkable either. Just a face at the end of a long day. And then the voice showed up. "You should have handled that call better. You sounded unsure. You probably came off as unprepared." The thoughts arrived the way they always did, quick, automatic, dressed up as helpful feedback. Jasmine didn't flinch. She had heard them so many times they felt like part of the background. She reached for a towel and dried her hands, her eyes still on the mirror. For a moment, she noticed something small. The tighter her thoughts became, the harder her face looked. Jaw set, brow slightly furrowed, shoulders rising without permission. She exhaled without planning to. The face in the mirror softened just a little. Jasmine leaned closer and rested her hands on the edge of the sink. The glass reflected her exactly as she was. Not worse, not better, just accurate. She thought about how often she treated herself like a project that needed constant improvement. How every interaction became something to review, every silence something to interpret. The world in her mind felt sharp because her inner lens was sharp. The mirror didn't argue. It didn't reassure her either. It simply showed what was placed in front of it. Water continued to run in the sink. Jasmine turned it off and listened to the last drops fade away. The quiet felt wider now, like the room had exhaled with her. She remembered something she once heard, though she couldn't recall where. A lake reflects whatever stands before it. It doesn't decide what's worthy of being seen. That idea stayed with her as she studied her own reflection. Maybe the world hadn't been harsh today. Maybe it had simply been reflecting the way she was looking at herself. That thought didn't accuse her. It didn't blame her. It just hovered, offering space. Jasmine straightened and gently wiped a small smudge from the mirror with her sleeve. The glass cleared only slightly, but enough to notice the difference. The reflection didn't change much, but the effort felt kind. She turned off the bathroom light and walked into the bedroom, leaving the mirror behind. The apartment was quiet. Street lights cast soft lines across the floor. She sat on the edge of the bed and let her shoulders drop forward, then back. For the first time that evening, she didn't replay the day. She didn't rewrite conversations. She didn't correct herself. She simply sat. If the world felt harsh sometimes, Jasmine realized it might not be because it was judging her. It might be because she was standing in front of it with clenched hands and a tight heart. And just like the mirror, the world could only reflect what it was given. She lay down slowly, the mattress meeting her weight without resistance. Her breathing deepened on its own. Somewhere inside, the voice grew quieter, not because it was silenced, but because it wasn't being fed. The lake doesn't need to change the sky. It only needs stillness to reflect it clearly. Jasmine closed her eyes, letting that thought settle without turning it into a rule or a promise. Just a gentle understanding allowed to be unfinished. Jasmine lay still for a while, long enough for the room to lose its edges. The streetlights outside didn't move, but their glow softened as her eyes adjusted. Somewhere below, a car passed and then faded, leaving the night intact again. Nothing called for her attention. Nothing needed a response. Her body began to settle in small, quiet ways. Her jaw loosened first, then her shoulders. The tight place between her ribs softened, as if it had finally been given permission to stop holding itself together. She thought again about the mirror, about how easily she had believed the reflection was the problem. For so long she had assumed that if the image felt harsh, then something about her must be harsh too. But mirrors don't judge. They don't criticize. They don't exaggerate. They only show what's placed in front of them exactly as it is. The same was true, she realized, for so many moments in her life. Conversations that felt cold, silences that felt heavy, rejections that felt personal. What if they weren't proof of something wrong with her, but reflections of how tightly she was holding herself while standing there? The thought didn't land as a revelation. It felt more like a quiet reframing, the kind that doesn't ask you to change immediately, just to notice. Jasmine turned onto her side and pulled the blanket up a little higher. The fabric brushed against her cheek, grounding familiar. Her breathing slowed further, deep and uncounted. Thoughts still came, but they moved like ripples now instead of waves. A showing that didn't turn into an argument. A message she hadn't answered yet. A feeling of mild regret that didn't demand punishment. She noticed how different it felt to meet those thoughts without sharpening them, without turning them into evidence, without adding a second layer of judgment on top. In the bathroom earlier, when she had softened her face, the reflection had softened too. Not because the mirror changed, but because she did. That small act of gentleness had altered the entire scene. Maybe self-worth wasn't something you built or earned. Maybe it was something that appeared naturally when you stopped attacking your own reflection. Jasmine didn't promise herself she would be kinder from now on. She knew better than to make vows at night, but she allowed the possibility that tomorrow didn't need to begin with criticism. That the day could be met with open hands instead of clenched ones. Her breath moved slowly in and out, steady as water settling after being stirred. The image of a lake came to her mind, calm and wide. When the surface is agitated, everything looks distorted. When it rests, the sky shows itself without effort. She didn't need to fix the lake. She only needed to stop throwing stones into it. The thought drifted through her and dissolved before it could turn into advice. Jasmine stayed with the feeling instead. The quiet relief of not having to manage herself for a moment. The safety of not being evaluated. Outside, the city continued to exist without her supervision. Lights stayed on, lights turned off. People slept, people woke. The world didn't require her commentary to keep moving. Jasmine felt herself getting heavier in the good way. The kind of heaviness that comes before sleep when the body trusts the surface beneath it. Her eyelids grew warm. The space behind her eyes darkened. If the world reflected how she treated herself, then this moment mattered. Not as a lesson, not as a breakthrough, but as practice. A brief experience of being met with softness instead of scrutiny. She let her thoughts blur at the edges, let the day slide out of focus. There would be time later to look again if needed. Tonight wasn't for that. The lake doesn't hold on to images. It reflects and then it rests. Jasmine rested too. Jason turned off the engine and stayed in the car. The parking lot was almost empty. A few lights buzzed overhead, throwing pale circles onto the asphalt. Somewhere nearby, a tree moved in the wind, its leaves brushing against each other in a slow, uneven rhythm. He should have gone inside. His apartment was only a short walk away. But he stayed where he was, hands resting on the steering wheel, shoulders slightly hunched forward as if he were still bracing for something. Jason was 23, a community college student still figuring out what he was supposed to become. Lately, it felt like everyone else had already decided. Friends posting graduation photos, new jobs, new cities, new lives that looked clean and confident from the outside. He hadn't failed. Not exactly. But he hadn't arrived anywhere either. Jason glanced at his phone on the passenger seat face down. He already knew what was there. Notifications he didn't want to open. Photos he didn't want to compare himself to. Timelines that made his own life feel stalled. He looked away and focused instead on the tree near the edge of the lot. It was old, thick trunk, wide branches reaching out in every direction. The kind of tree that didn't look like it had ever been in a hurry. Its roots must have been deep by now, spreading out beneath the concrete in ways no one could see. Jason watched it sway slightly in the breeze and felt something tighten in his chest. Earlier that day, he'd been in a small garden section of a hardware store, killing time before class. He hadn't meant to stop there. He just wandered in, drawn by the quiet. On a low shelf near the back, he'd noticed a row of bonsai trees, each one carefully shaped, trimmed, wired into a precise form. They were beautiful, controlled, finished. He remembered thinking how neat they looked, how intentional, how impressive it must be to grow something so perfectly contained. Now sitting in his car, he thought about the difference between those bonsai trees and the old one in front of him. Both alive, both real, but grown under very different conditions. Jason rested his forehead lightly against the steering wheel. The car was still warm from the drive. The faint smell of plastic and dust filled the space. He'd spent the last year feeling like a bonsai in the wrong pot, trimmed too often, compared too closely, constantly adjusted to fit a shape he wasn't even sure he wanted. Every time he thought about taking a different path, a quieter voice in his head would pull him back. "You're falling behind. You should be further along by now." That voice sounded practical, reasonable. It rarely yelled. It just kept pointing out how much taller other people seemed. Jason straightened up and rolled his shoulders, trying to release some of the tension that had been building there all evening. His breath came shallow at first, then slowly deepened as he sat there longer. The old tree outside didn't care how tall it looked compared to anything else. It wasn't measured against a timeline. It didn't apologize for growing slowly or unevenly. It simply took up the space it had been given year after year. Jason realized how often he'd assumed there was a single right shape for a life. Graduate by this age, earn this much, know this clearly who you are. Anything outside that shape felt like a mistake. But what if some lives weren't meant to be trimmed small and tidy? What if some needed time, space, messy seasons where nothing looked impressive from the outside? He opened the car door and stepped out. The air felt cooler, immediately brushing against his face and arms. He walked a few steps toward the tree, stopping at the edge of the parking lot. Up close, the bark was rough, uneven. Scars from years of weather insects, repairs the tree had done on its own. Jason reached out and rested his palm against the trunk. It felt solid, grounded, alive. The tree hadn't grown like this by accident. It had grown like this because it had been allowed to. Jason closed his eyes for a moment and let himself breathe. Not deeply on purpose, just enough to feel the air move in and out of his chest without resistance. Maybe he wasn't late. Maybe he wasn't behind. Maybe he was just not meant to grow in a shallow container. The thought didn't solve anything. It didn't give him a plan. But it loosened something inside him, the way loosening a tight knot doesn't fix the rope but makes it usable again. Jason stepped back, gave the tree one last look, and headed toward his apartment. The night felt quieter now, less judgmental. Not because his life had changed, but because the way he was measuring it had softened. Some things aren't small because they're weak. Some things are small because someone keeps cutting them back, and some things, given enough room, grow exactly as they're meant to. Jason didn't turn on the lights when he entered the apartment. The faint glow from the parking lot slipped in through the window, enough to see the outlines of furniture, enough to move without effort. He set his keys down on the counter and left his shoes by the door, not lining them up the way he usually did. Tonight didn't feel like a night for adjustments. He sat on the edge of the couch and let his back curve forward naturally, elbows resting on his thighs. His phone stayed in his pocket. For once, he didn't feel pulled toward it. The comparisons it held felt distant now, like something that belonged to another room. The image of the old tree stayed with him, not as a lesson, not as an idea to apply, but as a feeling in his body. The weight of the trunk, the steadiness, the sense of time moving slowly, without apology. Jason noticed how often his life had felt like it was being shaped from the outside. Grades, expectations, advice offered with good intentions, all of it trimming, wiring, redirecting. None of it meant to harm him, and yet something in him had been quietly resisting for a long time. He leaned back against the couch and stared at the ceiling. A small crack ran across it, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. He had lived here for months before ever seeing it. Now it seemed almost comforting proof that things didn't need to be flawless to hold. The old tree outside hadn't asked to be admired. It hadn't worried about being impressive. It had grown because it was alive, because the ground beneath it was deep enough, because no one had tried to make it smaller to fit a shelf. Jason felt his breathing slow as that thought settled. Not intentionally, not as a technique, just a natural response to not being measured for a moment. He thought about the bonsai trees again, how much care they required, how carefully they were pruned, shaped, constrained. They weren't wrong. They were beautiful in their own way. But they needed constant attention to remain that way. Maybe some lives thrived on structure and careful shaping, and maybe others needed seasons of uneven growth stretches where nothing looked tidy or finished. Maybe comparing one to the other had never made sense in the first place. Jason shifted his weight and felt the couch cushion rise and fall beneath him. The room was quiet enough that he could hear his own breath, steady and unforced. The tension he'd been carrying in his chest earlier had softened like a muscle finally allowed to rest. He didn't feel proud. He didn't feel resolved. What he felt was simpler than that. He felt allowed. Allowed to grow slowly. Allowed to change direction. Allowed not to know yet. The pressure to arrive somewhere specific eased its grip. Not gone, just quieter, less convincing. It no longer sounded like truth. More like a habit losing momentum. Jason stood up and walked to the window, looking out toward the parking lot. The tree was still there, barely visible now, its shape blending into the dark. He didn't need to see it clearly to know it was standing. Some growth happens where no one is watching. Some strength comes from being left alone. He turned away from the window and moved toward the bedroom. The floor was cool under his feet. The bed welcomed him without resistance, sheets folding easily around his weight. He lay on his side and let his arms rest where they fell. There was nothing he needed to plan tonight, nothing he needed to compare. Tomorrow could handle itself. As his eyes grew heavy, Jason noticed one last thing. The feeling of being behind had been replaced by something quieter. A sense of being exactly where he was without judgment attached. Not small, not late, just growing in his own way. The old tree didn't rush the night, and neither did he. The room settled. The thoughts thinned. The measuring stopped. And in the dark, with no one watching, something inside him continued to grow slowly, naturally, without needing to prove itself at all. wherever you are tonight. I'm grateful you chose to spend this quiet time here. If these stories help you rest, you're welcome to subscribe and return whenever you need a gentle place to land. And now, you don't need to do anything more. Let the night hold what you can't carry. And if sleep comes, let it come.